Welcome to Squirrel, the podcast for distracted writers, hosted by Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner. Hi, welcome to Squirrel, the podcast for distracted writers. I'm Jody L. Milner, and I'm here with my co-host,
Candace J. Thomas.
Today, we are talking all about validation for writers because you deserve a gold star. It's hard work. So, validation is something that doesn't really come to mind until you realize you really need it and you're not getting it. So, like in any other industry, this kind of validation can come in so many different forms. Like I say, your paycheck is part of an external validation. You're being showed appreciation for your work in a form of money, but you also can get praise from coworkers and bosses. But I think Candy has a very different definition of validation as well.
I think it's interesting that you wanted to do this as a subject. I'll just state that right there.
Okay.
That validation is an interesting subject. And I do say that it's heavy because it does unpack some boxes. So a validation within the laboratory standard is just there's a specific expectation to be met with that. There's a quality that you have to reach. That's what validation is kind of ingrained into my subconscious because so when you're looking for goals, I'm looking for a specific standard when it comes to validation. Does that make sense? So when you bring up that validation in a writer's sense as something that will tell you that you're doing something well, right? That
you're not wasting your time.
Right. And I have just a slight like not a complaint, but a different idea of what validation is.
Well, I mean, it also means getting that little sticker for your parking, but that's not what we're talking about today.
No.
Oh, hang on, squirrel.
So, okay, but go on.
So I feel in the writing world, and that's why I wanted to talk about this, because I feel that as writers, compared to other occupations, compared to other pursuits, we do not receive the same type of validation, and therefore it's harder to recognize when it does come.
It's hard to gauge because writing is an art form, and art is subjective. And so how can you tell if you're actually doing something right or not? You know? So so understanding that people like your work fills the tank, and you want to keep on going and want to, give something else to them for, to read or whatever. But it's difficult to know what to take and what to throw away, you know what I mean? But
you mean you can't just take all of it and hope it sits nicely together?
No, you have, so what is validation? What kind of validation are you specifically talking about?
Well, it's to repeat it's to feel appreciated and that your work matters and that, like I said before, you're not wasting your time. You're not sitting for hours and hours and hours putting words on a page, and have everyone come back and being like, oh my gosh, you wasted your time. This is awful. Why did you do that? Why were you not doing other things that could have been more, where was I going with that?
No, I understand
things that
what you mean.
Impact your life positively, hanging out with your family or making your home a more peaceful place. People find value in different things.
Yeah, validation for me is, it encompasses everything. It's not just writing; it's everything. It's like when you are trying to get approval from your peers or your family or your friends. It's just in every single thing that you do. And when writing is part of who you are, when you don't receive that validation, if you're struggling receiving that, then I can see that will just be completely detrimental to your entire career and your entire person, everything. I just don't find a difference between you mentioned paycheck, and I don't think that that's validation, getting a paycheck. I don't find that that's, I don't know.
When I get my $250 from Amazon, Like, I'm like, people like me. I feel more encouraged to keep going. And yes, that was that was 2 months ago. This is not a business for the faint of heart.
Okay, so one of the things that you mentioned, and you wanted to find the difference between external and internal validation. I want to know your explanations for that. What are your definitions?
I think external validation is validation that you're seeking from other people, other sources that are outside of yourself, whereas internal validation is created from your own experience and your own sense of, I did something good. When you finish a chapter and you're like, that was awesome and I love it, that's some internal validation. When you work really hard to finish something and you know it turned out well and you let yourself have that moment of celebration, that can also serve as internal validation. How about you? Do you have
I have a bigger... So
you have a bigger one.
Well, external, I'm thinking as, do I get an agent? Or do I self-publish? Or am I seeking for someone else to recognize my stuff as worth it? I know when I first wanted to publish, I felt that I wasn't a very good writer until somebody picked up my work and said, we want to publish this. So I absolutely needed to go traditional because I didn't have the self-esteem that it needs to be a indie writer at all. And I think that a lot of people are right there. Do I need to hear from other people, from others in the profession, that I'm good enough, that I can do this? Or are those people like, oh, I feel this is good. My mom loves this, so I'm good to just send it out to the world. You know what I mean? An internal, I'm getting that. I mean, it's better than just, I was thinking, well, is this like a self-love type thing? So my internal validation would be like, well, it's like, I'm looking at my notes. Where did I put it? Yeah. So internal validation, there is comparing yourself to others. Do you compare yourself to others a lot of the time? I'm asking you that question. Yeah, you do.
Well, you kind of have to, because you need to be aware of like what's going on in the market. I think you do need to be aware of what the standards are and what level of experience and expertise that you need to reach before trying to achieve specific goals. So like if you've never published ever, and you just need someone to say, hey, you're good enough. And if that comes in the form of being picked up by an agent or a publisher or a small publisher or whatever your route is, like if that's what you feel your next step is, then that's really important because that's where you're at. And we have a similar journey in that way where our first time out of the box, the box was very big and scary. And like, it was nice to have someone hold your hand that first time out of the box. And then as you learned and grew into yourself as an author and an authorpreneur and someone who needs to be doing the business side and the writing side, like, then you're like, this is a different topic. And I just ran away with my squirrels into the forest.
Internal validation for me is remembering that writing is fun.
That's true.
Because I think a lot of people forget that. I know I do. I have like, I'm going to write. This is going to be great. But then when I get down to it, I'm like, I dread this. Why am I doing this? No one really cares. No one wants to hear this. No one wants to read this. Those I call, it's like the little devil on my shoulder. You
and your brain gremlins, my brain gremlins.
Yes. External, I've won a couple of contests, which have meant, I've got a pretty awesome award that has made me feel like, well, people really liked me and it really and that was the very first novel that I ever wrote. So from that point on, I felt like I can handle whatever comes, whatever is, but it's hard to, this is just a hard subject for me.
I think the what is not as important as perhaps the why. And so why we need validation, there's this whole idea of how it equates to how our brain works, because our brain works on a reward system. So if you do something and you get a positive reward, when you go back to do it again, your brain's like, I like this. But when you do something and you get a negative reward, the next time you sit down to do it, there's going to be a moment where you're like, this is uncomfortable. I should avoid it. And so if you're sitting down and you're having this writing session and you're ending it and you're like, this was awful and I hate it. And next time you sit down, your brain's like, remember, this was awful and you hate it. And it's going to make things harder. And so if you have this, if you've been working on, self-love and self-care, then it is a matter of saying, hey, I know this was a challenge for me. I worked through it. I was successful. I'm proud of myself for working through something that was actually quite difficult. The really emotional scenes that when you're done, you're like, you feel like a wrung out towel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like if you say, I hate this, and that's the only thought you're having about it, your brain's not going to be conducive to helping you go back and do the next page or the next chapter or the next scene, because you're training it. And so I think with a lot of validation, that has to be kept in mind, because if you're training yourself to hate something, you're going to get writer's block and you're going to just freeze up. And then the whole idea of, I really wanted to write a book, I really wanted to finish a short story, is going to suddenly feel unattainable.
Mm-hmm. Why do you feel that validation is so hard though for writers? I mean,
it's abstract.
Are you a person that likes to read your reviews?
Sometimes. I don't have enough of them to rub together in my fingers. So I will do it because I feel there's important information in them, but I'm fairly analytical. I won't let someone say, this book sucked. It wasn't like beef jerky. Or there's some really awful reviews out there. I think I can take it with a good enough grain of salt that I can take constructive criticism. So I don't get, I get really annoyed when there's a 1-star review with no notes. I'm just like, all right, I have feelings about you too. Mm-hmm. Random stranger.
Mine are usually like, did not finish. That's the end. I'm like, okay, my book is not for you then, and that's okay. And that's one of the things that's hard for writers, I think, is separating the fact that you aren't going to be everyone's favorite writer.
Absolutely not. In fact, and you are not your book either. Mm-hmm. Your book has to stand on its own, and people are going to love it or not love it. And that depends on, the kind of stuff they like. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important to realize that you're not going to please everyone. So finding the people that absolutely adore your stuff should be your goal once you finish, because you should finish first. Mm-hmm. And now, a word from our sponsor.
This episode was sponsored by the Farmhouse Recording Studio. The Farmhouse Recording Studio is located in Bluffdale, Utah. It was designed and built for podcasts, audiobooks, radio ads, and so much more. Visit us at farmhouserecording.com. That's all one word, farmhouserecording.com. Or visit our Instagram at The Farmhouse Recording Studio, all one word. Now back to the show.
So your validation as a writer looks like what?
A lot of chocolate.
Mine too.
Hey. We just bought another big thing of chocolate-covered raisins. I'm in so much trouble.
Oh, my goodness.
But
let me not...
Seriously, though.
Have I introduced you to the cashews that are covered with toffee and then covered by chocolate?
Don't even tell me. That's too dangerous.
I have some in my car.
Stop.
Okay. Yes. No, I need rewards. I do. I'm a reward type person when it comes to writing. Or I don't feel like I accomplished something.
And working towards goals and then meeting them and then rewarding yourself, no matter what that reward looks like, I think is really important. Mm-hmm. And so my internal validation does have a lot to do with meeting certain goals and then having some sort of minor celebration, whether it be chocolate, whether it be letting myself watch The Witcher again. celebration can come in all sorts of forms.
Mm-hmm. How does it feel when you get validation from the writing community?
It's kind of weird. It's cerebral because part of you like, yay, they like me. And the other part of me is like, I don't belong here. And so you're fighting these two ideas all the time. And so like I recently got a couple really, like I got some nice 5-star reviews. I didn't have text on them, but I'll take it. And I'm like, that's so nice. I didn't screw up in that person's eyes. That is lovely. And then I got an opportunity to be part of a teaching opportunity. Mm-hmm. And it feels nice because I didn't reach out and say, hey, I really want to be part of your thing. Please, please, please let me in because, I don't think I suck. Mm-hmm. Like someone just reached out and they're like, hey, we would love you to help us with this. And like, that was really nice. It shows that, maybe I haven't completely screwed up. Yay.
For me, like I'm inspired by anytime I get validation. I mean, in the writing community, sure, that's fine. But I get more validation from readers or when I meet people and I know that I inspired them. In that respect, like I love meeting people at conferences. If they come and talk to me about writing and about their writing, I am all in. I will talk to them for hours. I will become their best friend, and I will do whatever I can to get them inspired to continue writing and to eventually publish. So that to me is my validation. If I make an impact on somebody's life, that keeps me going.
And that's awesome. I love conferences for the same reason, just because you kind of can commiserate together, but you also can build and grow and celebrate each other in a way that only fellow writers can. It's a very unique mindset. And I think it's like most writers like each other just because they're like, oh, you've been through the same warpath I have.
Yes, we all speak the same language, which nobody my family doesn't understand anything about writing. And when I get into a community of writers and we're all on the same wavelength, like we all are up here thinking creatively, and our brains are just alike. We kind of sink into that. So understanding the world of writing is really important to get that.
And what to expect. You should you shouldn't expect people to come throw roses at you for publishing a book. Sure, your family might be like, that's awesome, way to go. But it doesn't come naturally. And unless you are working really hard to get your stuff in front of other people, sometimes it doesn't happen at all.
Yeah, that's
true. And so the expectations versus reality is a conversation you need to have with yourself. Mm-hmm. So we've come up with a couple ideas, like some take-home little nuggets of wisdom that have to do with how you can find this validation without getting so stuck up in the works where it's just this big, hairy mess. Mm-hmm. And so the very first one is that you should redefine your idea of what validation looks like, because a lot of people have this misplaced expectation that the second they put a book out, they're going to be famous.
Yeah.
And and as people who, Candy and I go to conferences all the time, and that is, you see the stars in their eyes, and they are so excited that they're going to make this amazing thing. And right out the gate, they're going to be famous just for publishing a book. And the reality is that doesn't happen unless you're already kind of famous.
Yeah.
If you're already famous and you put a book out, then kudos, good job.
That seems so easy.
I know, right?
No, it was
just be famous. Good luck. So for most of your writing successes, your validation is going to be internal. It's going to be things that you come up for yourself to celebrate because you're working hard and doing a good job. So you need to be happy about where you are and how far you've come, because all successes are good successes. Yeah. And even if you fail, you're learning something, and that is a success too. Mm-hmm. You get a good review, you celebrate. You get a chapter finished, you celebrate. You get feedback that you can use, whether it's good or bad. Celebrate, because you can use that and you're learning and you're growing. Next point is what you can't control.
Yeah. You can't control, you can't control people. You can't control awards. I think we talked about waiting for an award or a contract or love or adoration or fans or whatever is going to take a while. So having patience in mind when you're when you're becoming a writer and when you're seeking that validation is going to be extremely important, because I don't think that until you know what the other side looks like that you actually can know where to find that validation. But it's going to take a while to get the external validation. So that's why it's more important to kind of look at the inside of where your internal validations, right?
That's why it's important.
Yeah.
So the last point I want to make is that there might be months where you simply don't receive any form of external validation at all. If you're in the middle of doing something else and you're still hoping that, your little project you put out is going to keep on reaping all of these rewards, know that if you're not actively helping that book find its readership, people don't find it. So you need to be okay with these periods where you might not get acknowledged for your work at all. And you still need to find ways that you can find ways to make the work rewarding during these periods where you're focusing on creating new products instead of focusing on finding new readers, although ideally you should do a little bit of both as a long-term plan.
For me, when you're looking, I think it's important you have to be out there. You have to try things. I'm really big in experimenting to understand what works and what doesn't. And unless you try, you'll never know. So I would suggest, yes, go ahead and submit to those contests, because you never know if you're going to win or not. Go ahead and submit to those articles, because we know what's going to happen. Like, we know the answer if you don't. Mm-hmm. You never know what's going to happen until you at least try. And both Jody and I have pushed our work out there for people to judge and for people to critique and for it to get rejected. And we know what that feels like. And we also know what it feels like when we get those rewards. So that if you don't try, you'll never know what that kind of validation feels like.
And you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. That is not my quote. That's somebody else's quote.
Is that some writing advice?
It's a little bit of writing advice. That is a brilliant segue, by the way.
I know, right? So our next episode is all about the best and worst writing advice. So very good.
We'd like to thank you all for coming and listening to us today. I think this has been a delightful discussion. As always, thank you for sharing the discussion with me, Candy.
Absolutely.
It was lovely.
It was so much fun.
This has been a Squirrel podcast. Squirrel. And we'll see you next time.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Squirrel Podcast for the Distracted Writer with Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner. This episode was recorded at the Farmhouse Recording Studio. Please like and subscribe to our podcast for updates and new episodes, and find more information at our website, squirrelpodcast.com. Stay distracted, everyone. Okay, we need to talk about Esperanto, though, quickly. So that is
Can we just put a pin in that one?
Sure. Okay, just write Esperanto so we can talk about it later.
So random. All right, starting podcast in 3, 2, 1.